Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the sixth webinar in this series, In the Dark, presented by Subterranea Britannica. This evening, I'm going to present a talk on the Williamson Tunnels in Edge Hill, Liverpool. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Tom Stapledon, and I'm a member of the Friends of Williamson's Tunnels. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Friends first as a background to where this is going, and then I'll give you some information about Joseph Williamson himself before we move on to the main slideshow and about the tunnels themselves. I've got quite a lot of slides to get through, and I tend to talk too much, so this might overrun by several hours. Most of you will probably have left the room long before me. But anyway, let's start with the Friends of Williamson's Tunnels. It goes back to 1995, I think, when a few individuals working on their own sort of became aware of the myth or rumour about some odd tunnels under the Edge Hill district of Liverpool. This happened because Liverpool City Council, who owned a disused yard in the Edge Hill district, an old stable yard, were proposing to sell the land for development and for the building of student flats, something we're not short of in Liverpool. And these people, working quite independently, sort of broke in, climbed over gates, over fences, into this overgrown yard, slithered down slopes at the back through the undergrowth, and discovered a wonderful double brick arch tunnel poking out of the hillside, almost buried behind trees and shrubs and brambles. And they thought, oh wow, this is something a bit special. Some research started at this point into the long lost story of Joseph Williamson, and these people somehow got together and they formed a pressure group because they thought, we can't allow this to be bulldozed away and lost forever. So they had a fight on their hands with Liverpool City Council. There was some success and there was some failure. The success was that these two sections of tunnel in the corner of this yard were saved and later became the Williamson Tunnels Heritage Centre, run by another organisation known as the Joseph Williamson Society. The Friends of Williamson's Tunnels was formed at that point from the pressure group because many more of what we believe to be Williamson's Tunnels were completely lost when the development took place and more flats were built on that land. They may have been destroyed, but at least they're buried and they're inaccessible now. And we thought, we don't want them all to go the same way. We need to try and find and preserve and save as many of the Williamson tunnels as we possibly can. And the research got going in earnest. The Friends were formed in 1996, and it was the largest local history society in the country at the time, with about 1,400 members. It's still nearly as big today. There must be at least 1,300 members now. We've got people following us from all over the country and, in fact, all over the world, which is brilliant. It grew from just a history society, and eventually we became a limited liability company and also a registered charity. So that's where we are today, and we've been actively searching out more tunnels, getting access to them, emptying them out of all the years of rubble that was poured down, and trying to make them accessible for the public. And we've been quite successful at what we've done, but there's more to do. Right. I need to talk next about Joseph Williamson himself, and we'll get into the slideshow. So I think I'll turn my camera off now, because you don't need to be looking at me anymore. Yes, he was packed off in search of work in Liverpool at the age of 11 in about 1780. We think there's rather more to that story than that simple tale. Some researchers shown that the Williamson family came from Yorkshire, and there was a Tate family in Yorkshire who were glass manufacturers. One of the Tate family moved over to Liverpool, and he set up a business in the tobacco manufacturing business. He was importing whole shiploads of tobacco from the Americas and processing them into pipe tobacco and snuff, and probably distributing all over Liverpool and beyond. So we think that perhaps young Joseph was packed off to Liverpool with a letter of introduction. Go and find this man, Richard Tate, and he's going to give you a job. Anyway, whether that's true or not, he did find Richard Tate. He was taken on as an apprentice, and he lived in Mr. Tate's home, which is just a stone's throw away from the tobacco warehouse. He was obviously a very bright lad, and he worked his way up quite quickly through the company. This is Joseph Williamson at the age of 50, and he had his portrait painted to commemorate the fact that he made it to the grand old age of 50. Which is quite something in his day. Now, he was obviously a very bright lad, and he worked his way up through the company quite quickly and became almost indispensable to the Tate family. He worked his way right up to the top, in fact. His boss died somewhere along the line in the 1790s, and his son took over the running of the business. But it was Joseph who was basically doing the everyday work in the business and basically running it. By about 1800, he'd started setting up his own businesses, running side by side with his work at the Tate business. And he was becoming quite a wealthy man. He was in the import and export trade, exporting tobacco, we believe, and importing things like timber and salt from the Baltic states. He clinched his position within the family when he married the Tate's daughter. That's Elizabeth Tate, known to him as Betty. This is the daughter of his original boss, Richard Tate, and the sister of his new boss, Thomas Moss Tate. So he was well in there in the Tate family business, and also had his own businesses running side by side, and he was becoming a really wealthy man. Now, this is rather a complex looking plan. It makes total sense to me, but it probably looks a real mess to the rest of you. He looked up the hill to an area called Edge Hill, way outside the city of Liverpool at the time, on a sandstone escarpment. And it was just a little country hamlet at that time. And he chose to take on a plot of land which he leased in this area. And running through the middle of this plot of land is a street called Mason Street, which runs through there. And this spot here, where I put the dot, is where he built himself a house. He obviously decided it was time to move on and live somewhere a bit nicer. He had the money. Why shouldn't he move out and live in a pleasant place? And this is the one he chose. And this sort of became the nerve center of his operations. Most of the tunnels he created are based around this area, with Mason Street running through the middle of it. There are three yellow areas on this plan. The one I've just pinpointed there in the middle is the site of where Williamson built his own house, and he was living there until he died in 1840. The yellow area to the right of the plan is the section which is run by the Joseph Williamson Society as the tourist attraction, the Williamson Tunnels Heritage Centre. And then up in the top left-hand corner, we have another yellow area, which is another accessible area of the tunnels, which was emptied out by us over a period of years. And it's just off a little street called Paddington here. There's only about 100 yards of it left now. But that's the reason why we call that our Paddington Tunnels. Now, we're going to have a look at some of the chambers that Williamson created below where his house is. So we'll move on to the next slide. This one just gives you a feel for the kind of strange buildings that Williamson put up. This is not, I don't think, a mansion, as some people say, but a cluster of buildings around a sort of a crescent-shaped driveway. And all his buildings were very odd, very strange, very individual, but he built houses all along this street, Mason Street. At the moment, we really have no idea whether his intention was only to move up there and build himself a house, or whether he always intended to move into the property owning line. But as it turns out, he built houses all along the street and many others as well. And I'll just show you this next slide, because this is the sketch that was drawn for the painting which followed, and it's a slightly wider angle, and it shows on the left-hand side here the house that Williamson built and lived in himself. Three-story Georgian house, rather plainer than some of the others, but this is the house he was living in when he died in 1840. Where are we going next? Right, I don't really know sometimes what's going to come next here, so it's going to dart around a bit and it's going to catch me out as much as you. Excuse me. Under the land behind Williamson's house, there are a number of chambers below ground. Some of Williamson's underground structures were completely filled in with demolition rubble and all sorts of rubbish after his time, when they just became unnecessary spaces, and some of them were just a damn nuisance. Maybe sewage had been poured down there and they stank and they were full of rats, and people just filled them all in and then covered them over and forgot about them. But under Williamson's house, the structures he created there were not ever lost completely. And after our early research, we rediscovered them in 1996. And very soon after, we managed to get onto the site of a derelict garage building that had been built where Williamson's house was. And there were just holes in the ground with steel plates over them. And the tunnels beneath were still accessible. So this is the entrance point to the major chambers below Williamson's house. And the ladder comes down from the ground through a steel hatch, and it leads into what we have here, which is a rather nice little sandstone chamber. That's the mouth of the chamber, beautifully constructed, about 20 feet below ground level, and it serves absolutely no purpose at all, except to show the sheer quality of the workmanship of Williamson's men. That's looking at it from the other end. This little chamber is only about 25 feet long, but it's beautifully constructed. Some massive stone blocks involved, and we're very proud of it, even though we don't think it has any purpose at all. At the back here, where the ladder would have stood, we go round the corner to the left, and you used to have to duck down and go backwards down 3 steps before you could sort of straighten up, and you found yourself in a passage that we call the gash. It's less than shoulder width apart when you step into it, and you walk or trundle down a steep slope and finally empty out into what we call the Banqueting Hall at the bottom, major chamber below Williamson's house. That's it looking from the Banqueting Hall. That's the view looking into the gash. Very strange structure. We have no idea whether it's totally natural or whether it's man-made. Well, it won't be totally natural, but it may have been a fissure in the rock which has been opened out, possibly. It's much narrower at the top, as you can see, and as you trundle down the slope of rubble here, it opens out and becomes a good bit wider. The people going up there are on their way out. They would turn the corner to the left at the top, and then they'd find themselves at the bottom of the ladder. And this slide shows you what you would be looking at when you came out of the gash into the Banqueting Hall. This is a really impressive chamber, and it lies directly below Williamson's 3-story house, as it was. It's not a rectangular chamber. It's got a wider section of about 15 feet wide and a narrower section of about 10 feet wide. And you're looking in the direction of the road here, and the front of Williamson's house at the far end, behind that pile of rubble. All this has been poured down through a couple of holes in the roof, and you've got a lovely structure of this brick arch roof in 2 different widths, which makes it quite interesting to look at. In the side of this chamber, we have this lovely side passage we call the Gothic Arch. And again, there's a hatch at the top, and tons and tons of rubble have been poured down there over the years. On the right, you can see the entrance to the gash again. But of course, it was never completely filled in. So when we discovered it, we could see what we had. We couldn't tell how much rubble there was or how deep it went, but at least we could see it. This picture was taken some years later, when we finally persuaded Liverpool City Council, who own the land, to allow us to remove some of this material out of the Gothic Arch here, and pull it down and spread it out across the floor. Because we used to bring our visitors down there whenever we were able to get the keys from Liverpool City Council, and it was a very uneven floor and lots of rubble strewn around, and quite easy for people to slip and fall over. So we asked them if we could pull this rubble down, spread it out over the floor, and make it safer for our members to come down here and have a look around. Of course, this was only a blind. We really wanted to pull this material down so we could see if there was a set of sandstone steps leading down into the chamber from the archway at the side. Unfortunately, that proved to be wrong, and there was just a 45-degree muddy slope up there, and then a sheer drop. It's actually very much deeper now that we've moved everything, but it was quite obvious that it was never used as a way in to this chamber by Williamson or anybody else. This photograph tends to make it look shallower than it is, because it's one of Chris Iles's extra wide angle shots. It's actually quite tall, in fact, and it lies about 30 feet below ground. This is another area under Williamson's house. We call this the wine bins. The reason is because we put these sets of wine racks in here specifically for the making of a film that some people wanted to make of an Edgar Allan Poe story, and they wanted wine racks and wine cellars, and we put these wine racks and wine bottles in these three lovely bays here. We really think that they look as if they could have held wine racks, so when the filming was over, we left them. They seem to fit the bill, and they're gently rotting away, but they're still there, and we like them. You may notice from here, again, this was not fully filled up. We had access to this via a steel hatch in the ground, and we've done a lot of emptying out, but it wasn't full to the roof, so we could see what we were dealing with to a certain extent. And this is a lovely elliptical arch, not as strong as a semicircular arch, of course, but Williamson's men built them well, and this stood a 3-story building on top of it for many years, so no problem. Now we're looking an aerial photograph looking at the land where Williamson's house stood. This here is the frontage of Williamson's house. That's all that's left today. In about 1930, a garage moved into this site and took over the Williamson house and used it as a garage for some time before they demolished all the rest of the house apart from this bit of the frontage, and put up more modern buildings all over the site. You might notice that there's a factory here on one side and another factory here on the other side. They've since been demolished, and we know that there are chambers, Williamson chambers, underneath that land as well, and we've had the opportunity to dig and find more underneath those areas. This one shows Mason Street in the 1970s, I think, and the frontage of Williamson's house is there. It was a 3-story building. They've reduced the frontage down to 2 stories, but that's still survived in spite of everything that's gone on the land between Williamson's day and now. And this is all we have left. Very scruffy looking, very untidy, not particularly safe. But we're rather proud of it, and we want to keep it. It's all that we've got left of what Williamson built above ground, and so we don't want to lose it. We're fighting hard to keep it, while at the same time trying to get a lease on the plot of land behind from Liverpool City Council. Now on that land, we're now looking at the hatch and the ladder that leads us down to that sandstone chamber, and then round the corner, down the gash, and into the banqueting hall. We went all health and safety a few years ago to try and impress Liverpool City Council that we were safe. They'd always thought we were nutters, and they were very suspicious of us to start off with. Now they realise that we're nutters that aren't going to go away, but they do trust us rather more. But we took on this harness, tripod, winch, fall arrest equipment to try and please them. The floor of this chamber went down a good bit further after we'd excavated it out, and we needed a 7-metre ladder, so we did this just to make them feel as if we were doing things right. Here's one of our visitors on the way out. After having gone down to the banqueting hall, she looks quite pleased with herself and what she's done and what she's seen. Some sub-Brit members here might recognise Les Coe, one of our founder members, who's helping this lady out and unhooking her from the wire rope. Going right back in time now to about 2005, I believe. Our site of Williamson's house is up here on the higher ground behind on Mason Street. Here we have the high brick wall behind which is the magnet joinery factory, which showed in a slide a couple of slides ago. And we had army plans going back to the 1880s, which seemed to show up all the chambers or all the major chambers that were believed to exist under this land. And we didn't know whether to believe these plans or not, but we were allowed to have a dig here because we thought there was a large chamber under this land. And we managed to get permission. We had a dig there with a big digger, and we did manage to break into a chamber below there, which was rather nice. They had to bury it again. Now this is a painting of what we believe to be the largest of Williamson's underground structures, which has been named the Great Tunnel. It's a lot deeper than it looks there because there's a big drop over that parapet, but the two figures there seem to give an idea of the scale. Only an artist's impression, of course. And here we have a photograph which I believe is from the 1860s, which shows the Great Tunnel entrance from a different angle, so it looks a different shape. The green line has been superimposed on there, which was our attempt at trying to figure out where the ground level had moved to in later years. We had an attempt to get in there through that big brick wall, but we failed. We didn't find it. We now believe it's very much lower than we originally thought. But we did get into this tunnel here. This one is a total nonsense. There are 3 layers of brick arch tunnels, one above another, about 60, 70, 80 feet below ground. It makes absolutely no sense at all. But we managed to get into that top layer briefly and took a few photographs before it was all buried again and we had to get off the land. But it's one we'll be going back to very soon, we hope. That's a photograph taken inside the end of that triple-decker tunnel, top layer. We only have 1/3 of it on our side. Another 2/3 of it are on the other side of the railway cutting, which runs from Edge Hill down to Lime Street. And it's been dissected first by the railway tunnel, which was driven through in the 1830s, and then completely cut in half by the opening out of the railway tunnel into a cutting, which cuts right through Williamson's land, and it's about 80 feet deep where it goes through this. So it made a bit of a mess. Where are we going? Right, another painting. This depicts some of the houses on Mason Street built by Williamson, and it shows nice terrace gardens behind. Now, we think Williamson got the bug for arch building because in the beginning, he was sitting on a lot of old quarry workings, which probably looked a total mess. They'd been quarrying the stone out of here for many years. Maybe the workings were worked out. The soft, crumbly stone had been left standing and the good stone had been taken out in between. And Williamson wanted nice gardens behind his nice houses. So what we think happened was that he built arches in brick over the gaps and then laid soil so that he could then produce these nice terrace gardens behind. It's only a theory, but this is how we think the arch building started. And he had more and more men coming at him looking for work, and he didn't turn anybody away. He gave them jobs. So this is how we think it all started. A couple more photographs here, which I think are of the triple-decker tunnel. I don't know why they're in black and white, because they're not ancient photos. Some of these fellas are early diggers, so it's probably only from about 2005. But there you go, very atmospheric in black and white. This is another painting from the lower ground. A road called Smithdown Lane runs below Mason Street. And this is looking over a high brick wall, sorry, a stone wall on Smithdown Lane into what used to be Williamson's workyard. We know it was his workyard when he was building houses and doing his tunnelling and quarrying the stone out. And you can see a mass of arches here. I don't know what it's all about, can't begin to guess, but he obviously had the bug. I think he's turned into a real fetish. He can't help himself. Back to the tunnel plan for a moment. We've looked at this yellow area in the centre here, which is the site of Williamson's house. We briefly looked at this little blue square, which is the tunnel on the lower ground that we got into. Unfortunately, that one has since collapsed in recent times. The flats on this site were being demolished, and there were some big machines on this site, and one day there was an almighty whoosh, an escape of air, and the remains of this tunnel just collapsed. We knew the roof of it was compromised when we were in there, but it's a shame to lose any tunnels, but that one is definitely gone. There's a blue area here, which is our section of the triple decker that we managed to get into. And then on this side, that is the rest of the triple decker tunnel with the railway cutting dissecting it. The triple decker tunnel on the side of the Williamson Tunnels Heritage Centre is actually accessible, but it's very unsafe and they do not take visitors in there. There are tunnels here in an orangey brown colour, which we're almost certain exist. The ones in dark blue definitely exist, and these others in pale blue and green, they're pointed to by various ground surveys, but they're by no means definite. Unfortunately, when tunnels have been filled to the roof with rubble, they don't show up very well, as voids would. Anyway, we're going to have a look next at the Paddington section up here, which we rediscovered in 1999. Up here on the top of the hill, top of Edge Hill, this is St Mary's Church sitting right on the top of the hill. And in front here we have a little plot of land that we were very interested in, because a couple of historians had given us nearly all of the information about Williamson that we have. He was a very secretive man. He told us hardly anything, and he didn't write things down. He didn't leave plans. He was a most unhelpful person for us, very secretive. But we were led to believe that there was something very interesting going on below that ground. Looking from the other direction, this is taken from the top of the church tower. One of the nicest views you're going to get. Whole of Liverpool, 2 cathedrals, the Wirral and the Welsh Hills beyond, and 2 rivers in between. But here in the foreground is the plot of land that we were particularly interested in, because Williamson seems to have put up a set of 3 4-storey commercial buildings on this land around 1836, not that long before he died in 1840. Since then, those buildings were knocked down definitely by 1937, when these tenement blocks went up, Paddington Gardens. And what's below there was completely and utterly lost forever until we rediscovered them, because they were buried, totally buried. Now then, this shows the 3 tall buildings that Williamson built on that corner at the top of Paddington. As I say, they were commercial buildings for the first time in his career. All the others have been residential. And the top one, number 126 Paddington here, became a baker's and flour miller's. We know that for sure. And we were led to believe that the cellars beneath this building went as far below ground as the building went above ground, which got us rather excited. So when the tenement blocks were being knocked down and new student flats were being built, we were watching this site every day in case anything turned up. The developers knew what we were looking for, and they were kind to us, which is not the usual arrangement. Now, a gentleman who gave us the most important information was a Mr. Charles Hand. He was a local lad, and as a boy, he'd been down in these underground spaces and explored with his mates. Maybe got into all sorts of trouble, I don't know. But he always remembered it, and later in life, when he became a local historian and a member of the Lancashire and Cheshire Historical Society, he organised a party to go down here and visit. I have a feeling that maybe the Williamson building had become derelict by the time he went down there in 1925. You can see that they are filled with a certain amount of rubble at this point, so I'm assuming that they were no longer being used by this time. And we know they were demolished by 1937, but it might have been earlier. Anyway, Mr. Hand wrote about his exploits down here in the Liverpool Daily Post almost immediately. And of course, he bummed up the story quite badly. And he talked about moving around in a nightmare maze of tunnels and passages to many levels below ground, and walking for more than a mile in one direction without finding an end to it, which we fully believe is total rubbish. I would imagine there are quite a few sub-Brit members who have heard stories like that many times before, walking a mile without finding an end to it. We'll have to give him a little bit of leeway, because they're not exactly well-equipped explorers with their grey overcoats and bowler hats carrying candles. And if they'd walked a couple of 100 yards stumbling around in the dark over this rubble, they might have thought it was a lot further. So we'll give him a certain amount of benefit of the doubt. Anyway, he pointed us towards these things, and we were watching on the day that they were exposed in 1999. Some sub-Brit members here might recognise Steve Moran under that white helmet. This is very shortly after we made the discovery of the Paddington cellars, when a digger working in a deep hole in the ground here pulled a slab of stone aside and uncovered a hole in the side of a brick arch, and that was the day we got in. This photo is probably taken several weeks or months later, when we're in the process of building an entrance into this cellar system. They were very good to us, and they allowed us to do this. And then we had access from that point onwards, and have always had access to the Paddington cellars. And this shows you what the ladder went down into. Very small hole, only slim people could get through that with the ladder through the hole, into pretty much what Mr. Charles Hand and his party found when they went down in 1925. Plenty of rubble, but there was a bit of room to walk around in this area. And this, as it turns out, is the second level of cellars down from the ground, because the first level of cellar had been completely destroyed many years earlier, unfortunately. This gives you a sort of idea of what it looked like. There were some beautiful structures, beautifully constructed brick arches, very, very clever brickwork, and rubble everywhere. That's a beautifully constructed little side arch. We call it the Arch to Nowhere, because it's a very clever piece of construction, but it just goes 3 feet and then ends in the bedrock. Serves no purpose at all. Another view in level 2, and in this one you can see the hole where we broke in, right in the middle of the photo there. Still lots and lots of rubble around at this point. I'm just briefly going back to this photo of Charles Hand and his party being photographed, because as it happens by sheer coincidence, I think it's a lovely touch. This here is the hole where we broke in 1999. They were being photographed in that spot in 1925. And then our early volunteers were photographed in the same position. The hole is there. So some of you may recognize some of these people here. I'll just point out the 3 on the left. Claire Moorhead on the far left is our long-time treasurer and membership secretary, who has been with us from the beginning. Next is Steve Moran holding up a candle, who was founder member, unfortunately no longer with us. And then Les Coe in the red hat. All 3 of these were with us right at the beginning, and Les and Claire are still with us to this day. still doing their same jobs. There's another photo of Charles Hand and his party standing on the staircase outside of level 2. The gentleman in the foreground on the left is standing at the entrance to the level 2 chambers. I think this is probably a lady standing a bit higher up, a few steps up, at the spot where the main staircase comes down into the cellar system from within the ground floor of the building. And then in the foreground, the staircase goes on down to level 3. This is what it looked like when our people first broke in. Nobody knew there was a staircase under here. It was so full of rubble. And it was some time before they managed to move some of this stuff around and pile it up in other corners to expose the lovely stone staircase that led down to level 3 and round the corner to the right and tipped out into the level 3 chambers. And you passed under this lovely 5-layer corbelled arch to get into level 3. But when you were down there, there was not much room to move around. This layout is something like a letter H lying horizontally with 2 longer arms and 2 shorter arms. Where we're standing at the bottom of the stone staircase here, to the left and to the right here, a longer and a shorter chamber filled to the roof with rubble. And you could just crawl over the top of this rubble to the far side, and you had a similar arrangement, a longer and a shorter arm running parallel and absolutely full to the roof. The hole here in the roof is one of 5 that were made in the floor of the chambers above, which were used to pour all this rubble down below. It could even be that the Williamson building itself has been poured down here, or certainly local buildings, because it was an easy way of getting rid of your rubbish when you could just dump it into these big holes in the ground instead of paying somebody to take it away. Where are we going? This is our first level chamber. Rather embarrassed about this one. We've called it the mile-long tunnel, even though it's only a few yards long. We do fully believe that it goes further and joins up with other passages and chambers beyond. But when we were digging it out, we had to stop very quickly when the roof started to collapse, and we've blocked it off for the time being. But if there was anything that connected to anything that went further, it had to be in this direction, because lower down, it's just a set of very deep cellars and nothing leading off it, which was a bit of a disappointment to us, but it's still a very impressive site. This picture is looking down past the point where the staircase enters, and then the entrance to level 2 just beyond, and then on down the stairs to level 3 and level 4, in fact. Now, this was the first chamber we started to empty when we first got permission. From discovering these cellars in 1999 and having access made available to us whenever we wanted to, we could go down, we could do whatever we liked, we could move stuff around, but we weren't allowed to take anything out until 2012, when we finally got a lease signed with Liverpool City Council to allow us to excavate this. 13 very frustrating years when we couldn't take anything out and didn't know how deep it was going to go. But as soon as we got our lease, we sorted out the land above, so sort of fenced off our compound and made it safe. And then we started digging in November of 2012, and this is the first chamber we emptied. This is one of our regular diggers, Gavin, who's just uncovering a lovely set of plates and dishes here. We found an enormous quantity of artifacts, especially in this chamber, but also in all of the others going down. It was a real treasure trove. Lots of fragments and broken things, but some complete and very interesting items as well. In amongst all the bricks and soil and rubble and broken York stone, we found all this material. My own impression is perhaps that sometimes people were moved out of their homes when they were about to be demolished, slum clearances, and maybe didn't have the heart to take all their possessions with them and just let them be bulldozed away with the bricks and mortar. I don't know whether that story is right, but it seems quite feasible to me. And this is an idea of the sort of stuff we were turning up. There's a bit more of it, some really nice items. And of course we recorded everything that came out and where it came from, at what depth, in which chamber, and it was all recorded photographically and all put into storage, apart from the stuff that went out on display. There's that nice set of plates again. We had to drop that into a container of water for a couple of weeks to allow us to be able to separate them without breaking them. There we go. Right, this is that same chamber once it's been completely emptied. One of Chris Iles's lovely photographs with the sun glinting in through the dust in the air, looking down to the lower levels. I'm afraid I'm not at all sure where this is. Could be level 2, could be level 3. They were all filled with this rubble like this, and they all had similar looking arch constructions, so it's quite confused to me. That one I can identify. That is back on level 2. And that's that nice little arch to nowhere on the left-hand side. This is obviously when that chamber is partially excavated, but not completely. There's another view of level 2, partially excavated, but still a lot more to go. Chamber over here we haven't even started on yet. Another view of level 2, and the more we were digging out interesting artifacts, the more we started building these little displays in various corners using bricks and blocks of stone, backfilling with rubble, and then using them as a display area on top. Our visitors seem to love seeing all the things that we've dug up here. It's a real history lesson. We're very glad to show off the better bits of it. That's down to level 3 when we've started on the excavation, but haven't got very far yet. The chamber here, which is being used as a display, is still pretty much still full to the roof. This ventilation pipe comes down from the surface. We were blowing air down the whole time, and we always had the meter down there with us to make sure that the air quality was good and the oxygen level was high enough for safety. That's the same chamber when we've moved on somewhat. 5 of those people are actually standing on the bedrock floor of that chamber, which has been partly empty to the floor, but not completely at that point, and it's looking through into the next chamber beyond. By this point we've emptied that chamber completely, and we've had to put in this scaffolding staircase. You might not have noticed, of course, that lovely stone staircase turns the corner and just ends with a 7-foot drop. I've always called them suicide stairs. We don't know why. Personally, I don't believe these lower levels were actually ever used for anything, storage or anything else. They're very damp, very uneven floor, and I think it's just how the quarrymen have left it when they've walked away. They've actually stopped quarrying at this point because the stone has turned sort of soft and flaky and not much use. This is an adjoining chamber. A lot of people still calling it the ash chamber. It's actually coke. It's low-grade coke waste. It's been filled with from floor to roof, and it turned out to be 12 meters high. When we were digging up here, quite close to the roof, we had no idea how big it was going to be and how deep we were going to go before we'd finished. This was lovely lightweight material, very easy to shovel. You could fill the buckets to the top and it wasn't too heavy, so that was one of our pleasant areas to dig. Looking in the other direction, we have a rather nice drop hole in the ceiling here, and all this cokey material, I believe, I'm almost certain, came from a coal gas plant which was a mile up the road, and I think it was treated as a waste product, and they were looking for anywhere to get rid of it, and this cellar system became one of those convenient places for dumping it, and they went on pouring it down here, possibly for years, until this chamber was completely filled. Above there's another drop hole in the roof above this chamber in the level 2 cellars, and then bear in mind that the cellar above that has been totally destroyed, but there would have been probably another hole in the roof above that one, or possibly a hatch in the pavement, and all this material would have been sent down here. I have visions of horses and carts trundling down the road from the coal gas plant every day of the week and dumping this stuff down here. I don't know whether that's how it happened or not, but I like to think it was like that. Looking from the other direction towards that chamber, Nice wide angle view showing 3 chambers out of the 4. And this, at the other end of the scale, was one of the worst jobs we ever had to do. This material here, this white material, was a very heavy, sticky clay-like substance, which was very, very difficult to cut up and to move out. There must have been about 2 skipfuls of it, and it was the dirtiest job we had to handle. It clung to everything. We've since proved that this is gypsum, quite inert, pure gypsum, and I believe again that this came from the coal gas plant, and it was poured down here as a dry powder after it had served its purpose as a dry scrubber for removing some of the nasty gases from the coal gas. And over the years, it would have absorbed the moisture and become this sticky mess. We shifted about 2 skipfuls of it, and it was an awful job. There's a section of it I took home, cut in half with a sharp bread knife. Quite interesting looking layers in it. I don't know how it comes to be like that, unless it was poured down and spread out and then dust has settled in between layers. I'm not sure. One of the level 3 chambers, and now you can see that we're using hoists. A gin wheel came in very useful. We ended up with 3 hoists in the process of getting all this material out from 60 feet below ground. We'd already set up 1 hoist higher up in the tunnel to nowhere, sorry, in the mile-long tunnel closest to the surface, and then this became the 2nd hoist, and then there was another one further down. This is the chamber directly above that shot, and in the distance you may be able to see there's a brush sitting on top of a concrete slab, and below that slab is one of the holes in the floor that were knocked through. We ended up, after this chamber was empty, setting up a structure with a gin wheel and hoisting all that material up through the floor. And this lovely arch appeared quite unexpectedly between 2 adjoining chambers, and it became very useful to us. We're now standing in the coke chamber again, and as we were shoveling this material out, sliding the buckets across on a plank, and the man on the other side there is waiting to hold the buckets up on the 2nd hoist. Another one of Chris Iles's very wide angle shots showing 1, 2, 3 chambers and almost into the 4th as we're starting to go down, but we're still at the level of the base of the staircase at that point. And then move to that one, and you can see that the level of the staircase was up there, but the floor is 7 feet lower, so quite a drop. We had to sort of chip away at all this material a little bit at a time, 1 chamber at a time. We have a rise from that floor up to the other chambers, but we had to sort of take a couple of feet at a time off the surfaces to allow us to be able to move around without needing ladders. Now, jumping forward quite a long way, we've finally emptied this that I call the coke chamber right down to its floor. And it's at this point that it becomes obvious for the very first time, very, very first time really, that this place only exists, but Williamson was digging out the stone. Basically, he was quarrying to 60 feet below ground. Probably quite unusual. Most quarrying would probably be done in from the surface, as it was on the sandstone escarpment on the land that Williamson leased. And perhaps all the good stone had been taken and people had walked away and thought there's no more to be had here. Maybe Williamson discovered that go inland a bit more and there's still plenty of good stone. But however it came about, there is good stone to be had here. And he's gone straight down in the ground and hauled it up and out. And he's gone on quarrying for a long, long time. Whether he started these quarries or whether he continued where other people left off, we can't be sure. But this is a quarry floor, left as it was on the day when the quarrymen walked away for the last time. And they're channeled around blocks of stone. There are 3 blocks of stone in this particular chamber, 2 more in the chamber behind. And the next process would be to break off lumps of manageable stone and haul them out. And then you go on digging down and channeling around. But they come to a stop at this point, 60 feet below ground. That's looking in the other direction. The yellow barrel has a pump in it. We ended up using a set of 4 pumps to pump the water out. There's a tape on the wall here, which is actually 12.5 meters long. When we put it in, pinned it up to the top, we had no idea it wouldn't be long enough to reach the bottom. But in actual fact, this is 12 meters deep, and we're 2.5 meters short of the floor with that tape. And at about the level of the bottom of the tape, we first encountered water, and it got wetter and wetter as we went down. So we ended up having to set up a series of 4 submersible pumps, and we were pumping water out every Wednesday and every Sunday when we were working for about 7 or 8 hours. And we pumped thousands of gallons out every day. Otherwise, the place would have flooded. This is one of Chris Isle's superb shots. He's lying on his belly in the chamber above with his camera dangling through a hole, the hole, in fact, where all this coke material was poured down. It's a very heavy camera. It's a very expensive camera, and he was terrified of dropping it. I was crouched alongside him, hanging onto the camera strap in case it slipped out of his grip. But it's made for a superb shot. And there's another one with some of our diggers standing in the bottom, just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of it. 12 meters high. It's really the size of a church nave, and very, very impressive. You can sort of see in the side wall here the arch that joins between 2 chambers. And by this time, we've got a hoist set up in that archway. And it was the longest hoist that we used for hauling the material out from the bottom of this chamber. There's a picture of a group of our diggers who are just about finished at the end of their working day and very muddy just before they go out. Oh, this is jumping way back in time. In the early days when we first discovered the Paddington Chambers, and we had all those members very, very eager to know what it was that we found down here. And we were quite keen to take people down once we created a proper entranceway here. With hatches, and we had access to the land. And this is one of our very earliest members, Jim Moran, in his lovely red play suit, who's obviously just been taking a group of visitors down below to show them what we have. And they're on their way out at this point. I think if all these chaps and chapasses who had their visit on that day were to come back now, they would be absolutely amazed at what we'd uncovered down there, because they wouldn't have seen very much of it at all at that time when it was still so full of rubble. Totally different now. Very quickly, I'll skip through this. I didn't really want to include this because I haven't got the time, but we rediscovered the grave of Joseph Williamson on a site that was about to be built over by part of a bus station, I think, in the massive Liverpool 1 development that was taking place in the city. We asked if we could have a dig, because we believed Joseph Williamson's grave was still there, and we were lucky just right at the end of our allotted time, and we found the gravestone. And it says on the bottom there, also the remains of Joseph Williamson of Edge Hill, who died 1st of May 1840, aged 71 years. We were absolutely delighted to have found it, and we persuaded the developers, Grosvenor, to not build their bus station there, but to build a little memorial garden, which they did. A little triangular plot with notices all over it to commemorate some of the important people from the city who were still interred there. The church was long gone, and so was most of the graveyard, but that little corner remains. This one is the day we were allowed into the basement of the Walker Art Gallery to view the painting of Joseph Williamson. Not on display, unfortunately, but we were allowed to see it, and we were allowed to photograph it, which was nice. One day it may go on display, but I think it needs some restoration work. Right, now moving forward again, the Duke of Westminster was invited down to have a look at the tunnels in 2001, and he enjoyed his visit. And by June 2016, when we'd nearly finished emptying it, we decided it was time to invite him back, because he had agreed to become our patron. So he came back at our invitation on the 2nd of June 2016. We hadn't completely emptied it, but we had reached the bottom. And he was very impressed with his tour, very enthusiastic. He was a lovely man. And we gave him a full guided tour, the house site and Paddington. And he's posing here alongside the plaque we put up to commemorate his visit. And there's him being presented with a bust of Joseph Williamson by our chairman, Gordon Hunter. And then, unfortunately, just about 2 months later, he died very suddenly. He was a great loss to us. We enjoyed having him as our patron. But we found another patron. The Duke's son didn't want to take on his father's patronages. He chose to start again from scratch. So we shopped around and we came up with this man here, Dan Snow. He'd been to visit us, and he was interested in what we had. And on this occasion, he's agreed to be our patron, and he's come back to do one of his famous podcasts. I was one of his guides on this occasion, and here he is in the Banqueting Hall after we've completely emptied it at the far end. And he's got his assistant here who did all the filming and sound recording, and I was one of his guides. He made a very interesting video podcast, which was well worth watching, we think. That's another view of the Banqueting Hall now that it's been emptied at the far end being directly under the frontage of Williamson's house and right up against the road. At this end, I don't think we've completed. Oh, sorry. This is another one of Chris Iles' shots looking down through a hole in the roof at a group of diggers down below. This is actually about 30 feet below ground now that we've emptied it out completely. Excuse me, I've got a dry throat. Where are we going next? Right, looking from the other end, out of the mouth of the gash towards the far end of the Banqueting Hall, it looks as if we've almost completed the dig at this point. We have a scaffolding structure here that we put up specifically to rig up the hoist, and all the spoil goes up there with the hoist, and then onto a platform and across, and up with another hoist, another 15 feet to the surface. In the foreground, this looks pretty much as if it's just soil, but we got a bit of a shock when we found out that we hadn't actually reached the bottom. Oh, this one slipped in, just because I wanted to get my face on screen. We've entertained so many film, TV, radio, documentary makers, newspapers, and given them all the story of Williamson. And we've had quite a few programs made with us and about us. This particular item, I think, was, I think this girl was from the 7 Network in Australia, 7 Network news program. And they were in Liverpool and they wanted to interview us and show the tunnels. And it went on Australian TV. And I was her guide on the day, and we were being filmed down there in the Banqueting Hall. Let's get back to proper business. Looking in the Banqueting Hall towards the gash at the far end, and there's that scaffolding structure standing in front of the Gothic Arch, where all the material is going up and out. But it has suddenly started to appear that we haven't actually reached the floor. And this is a channel running across the floor of the Banqueting Hall from the base of the Gothic Arch. And we were not expecting that at all. But it actually turned out to be a very deep trench running right across the Banqueting Hall. It's now starting to look as if the Gothic Arch had a lot of water entering it from above via channels cut in the sandstone rock and later drain pipes laid in them. Although we never saw very much water there, it could be that in Williamson's day it was a major water channeling system, going back from the days before we had sewers down the street. If you had a real downpour, how was that water carried away from the gardens and the roofs of the buildings? Maybe this was one way. This actually went quite deep. At the far end that you're looking at there, it went down at 8 feet below the general floor of the banqueting hall. And as we dug down there, we've uncovered a rather nice little stone cut archway, another feature we weren't expecting. And we got quite excited about it until it turned out that it was only about 3 foot long, and then it seemed to end in a brick wall. That's looking down the gash. That deep trench is about 6 feet deep as it passes the gash, and we had no idea that the gash would dip down below the floor of the banqueting hall, which means that now you have to climb up a ladder to the right there to get up to the main floor. Quite strange. We weren't expecting it at all. We're going to move up to closer to the ground now. This is a sunken backyard behind Williamson's house, quite an unusual arrangement perhaps. And you're looking through the remains of a bay window towards the front of the house. This would have been a rather impressive bay window, 4 stories high in fact, because it was a 3-story building and it had this basement area below it, so 4-story bay window. Quite impressive looking, I would think. I really haven't got time to tell you about the urinals on the right hand side, but suffice to say they were put in by the military many years after Williamson's time. They certainly weren't built by Joseph Williamson for him and his wife. This is the basement area, which we have completely uncovered and was lost and buried for many years, since about 1930, I would guess. This came about because somebody had spotted just the corner of the top step of a lovely stone staircase made with bullnose steps. You can see it in the background here. And when we first got permission to excavate and dig on this site in November 2016, one of the first things we did was take a sledgehammer and break up a little bit of concrete in this corner up here. And we found that top step, which led us to believe that there was a full staircase leading down below. And of course, we wanted to know where it went. It turns out that the people who occupied the site as a garage, somewhere around the beginning of the 1930s, had chosen to fill this in. They bulldozed it full of demolition rubble, as so many other areas, and they'd completely concreted it over. So if we hadn't have discovered that little bit of a stone step and decided to investigate, we would never have known that it was here, and we wouldn't have uncovered it. And of course, we've uncovered this lovely array of, I don't know what we call them really. It's a cooking range, I suppose, 4-bay cooking range. It seems like overkill for Williamson and his wife, but who knows? Maybe it was put in by somebody at a later date. Lovely stone slab floor, and we got this nice stone sink on the right-hand side, and the staircase that comes down at the end. Looking in the other direction, you're looking towards the bay window, and another one of Williamson's arches on the left-hand side. Not sure why it's there. It's been bricked in at a later date, probably to strengthen the ground above, rather than demolish it all. Going back down below now to where we left off, we've emptied out that trench. We've uncovered this rock-cut tunnel, or arch, if you like, which is only 3 foot long, and found a brick wall against it. We were quite puzzled about this, and we tried to put a drill through it, and it didn't want to know. 1.5 meter drill wouldn't go through this brickwork. It turned out later, once we got round it, that it was not a brick wall, but a brick buttress, about 5 foot square. We realized quite quickly that it only overlapped the opening by a few inches on either side. So we cut through with a small hole on the right-hand side and found that it was full of spoil on the other side, as usual. This obviously meant that it had to have been built from the other side, so we got all excited again. And we started pulling spoil out, and it kept falling. And it kept on and on and on for weeks, and we kept on bucketing it and taking it out, and we couldn't understand what was going on. We made the hole a bit bigger. We started prodding in a little bit further and kept pulling this spoil out until the day that it stopped coming. And then one or two of us got brave enough to take the hard hat off and stick a head and an arm and a shoulder with a torch through the hole And lying on your back, you could shine the torch up, and there was another brick arch, 5 meters above our heads. We were absolutely amazed. So we had another chamber lying right alongside the one that we'd known all these years, and this new one is only 3 feet away and running parallel with the banqueting hall. We were absolutely amazed. We opened the hole out more, made fairly sure that if we went through, nothing was going to fall on us and bury us. And we got through and inside this chamber, and that's looking at the hole from the other side. It's big enough now to get through in and out at a crouch, but taking all the buckets of spoil out was a real tricky job, going through there, up the ramp, and then sending them up on 2 hoists. This is a shot looking straight up in the air at the roof of that chamber from the point where we first entered. There was a 5-foot square buttress right across the entry hole. Here we've got another 5-foot wide buttress about 10 feet away. And this is a steel pile driven down through the roof. It's a wonder that anything survived in this area, I'm afraid. We now know that the military, the volunteers who occupied the site next door, built these 3 buttresses right up from the bedrock to the surface to support a new concrete floor for their drill hall, where it was sagging. And they bust right through the roof of this chamber. But they didn't destroy it. Somehow or other, it held up. And then around 1970, the magnet joinery factory was being built next door, and they drove these enormous great steel piles down through the ground looking for solid ground. And 2 side by side in this area, another one just behind there, and then 2 at the other end. And again, they've done a lot of damage, but the area in between has survived, and we've now emptied it out. This is the central buttress that you're looking at here, which covered the hole through which we got in. And on the left, that is another one of those steel piles, but it's encrusted with bricks and rubble held on by concrete. We've dug quite a long way down at this point. It was a major job. This shot is looking down from a higher level. You can see a beautiful arch up here in sandstone, beautifully finished sandstone arch, which serves absolutely no purpose at all that we can think of. We did realize that we were in what had been a double tunnel, because we found the spring lines of a second lower arch in this chamber. And you're looking here at a section of that arch which has collapsed. No doubt it collapsed when those buttresses were being built. It was still intact to a certain extent, but held up by rubble. And as we dug down, I'm afraid it just disintegrated brick by brick, and it couldn't be saved because there was nothing supporting it. That's the site looking right down into the chamber we've excavated, pretty much down to the bedrock floor at that point. And it's quite an amazing structure. Our scaffolding is an amazing structure, and I haven't really got time to explain all about it, but the area to the right behind the boarding has had to be boarded off to keep that area back to make things safe. So this amazing scaffolding structure here has allowed us to go right down to the bottom, at least in part of it. And this is looking down from a deep trench, which was used to carry the water. It went round the corner and further down, and you're looking straight up at the roof from the deep trench. Going back outside the chamber again for a moment, this is where the buckets ended up the ramp through the hole, and then they were up on the hoist, a platform up there, and then carried through to another hoist and up another 15 feet. Quite a feat to get this material out. And now this is almost the deepest point that we managed to reach. One of our diggers, who just wouldn't give up, is right in the bottom of this hole, and the water, when it comes through the hole between the 2 chambers, comes through where the buttress now stands, and would have come down a gully here and then poured down below. Before the buttress was built, which blocked that waterway, it probably would have carried on in that direction, but we can't tell where the water goes to now. Unfortunately, we're blocked in at this point and can't move on for the time being. Very frustrating. Jumping backwards to Paddington, we've now got a couple of photos that show you what happens when the pump stops working, which it did a few months after our automatic pumping system was installed. And it took us many months before we got things sorted out. And we ended up with a boat in here, a lake with about 14 feet of water at the deep end. The pump is underneath the ladder, but it failed. And we were about to take the lighting out by the time this happened, because we thought it was going to be submerged and we didn't know how long the water would go on rising. But anyway, we got another pump in and we pumped it out, and everything was okay again eventually. And this is what the floor looked like. 2 flights of stairs down and then a final ladder. Our wooden stairs, which were built stage by stage, had been there for many years and were starting to rot away very nicely. So we had to take them out. It became absolutely out of the question to go down there anymore. It was totally unsafe. So we're in the process of removing the staircase at this point. Top flight's gone, second flight has got to go next. 2 wooden platforms and then the ladder to the bottom. And we finally got them out. And that's what the site looked like with it completely emptied. This site has never been seen since the day the quarrymen walked away on the last day. It was like this for about a week before we got our new staircase in. So what happened was we needed to have stairs to get our visitors down below. We found that it was prohibitively expensive to have a steel fabricated staircase put in, and we started looking at alternatives. One of the alternatives was a scaffold tower with internal stairs, which we started to investigate it, and we invited help and advice over social media. And we were lucky enough that a local company working around us on the Mason Street site, Morgan Sindall, came forward and offered help. They put us in touch with a company that they work with called Cheshire Scaffolds, who were absolutely brilliant. They came along, figured out what it was we needed, sourced it, priced it, and installed it at no charge for us. And here it is. And then this is where I get in my plug for Subterranea Britannica. They were absolutely brilliant as well, because we were invited to put in an application for a grant. We'd worked closely with SubBrit before, and we'd had grants before, and we'd hosted numerous visits to Liverpool for SubBrit. So we put in our application for a grant, and they granted it very quickly. And in fact, SubBrit paid the full cost of this staircase. So very, very grateful to Morgan Sindall, to Cheshire Scaffolds, and to SubBrit that we're now able to take our visitors down below again. A great success story, I think. I'm just going to finish off with this as quickly as I possibly can. The site next door to us, where a factory stood, the factory was knocked down a couple of years ago. The site became vacant, and we knew that there should be an interesting chamber underneath this land, under here, in fact. And we asked the council if we could have permission to go on that site for a week with a big digger and see if we could find it. And they granted permission, and we had about a week and a half, I think. We knew exactly where we wanted to dig, and we struck lucky. The digger was about 4 meters deep in the ground in this hole. Dug one trench and then turned 90 degrees and dug a second trench. And his bucket scraped at what he thought was the bedrock. But fortunately, somebody thought they saw it move. Then he realized, no, it's not the bedrock. It's actually a stone slab. He pulled it aside, and this hole appeared near the apex of the arch. We were absolutely delighted. This hole was only 40 centimeters square at the time. You needed to be a snake to get in. First thing we did was drop the gas meter down, check that there was breathable air and nothing nasty. Then we dropped in the laser measure and we measured it out. It turned out to be 13 meters long. We knocked a few bricks out and then we were able to get in, but not easily, because there was only 18 inches of spare space below there. And the whole chamber was filled to within 18 inches of its roof, and we could only slither along from one end to the other end, and it was exactly 13 meters long. running from quite close to the road inland on this plot of land. And I should point out, it may not be all that clear to you looking at these photos, but this one's a bit unusual, and it's not just a brick arch. It's been constructed with rows of sandstone blocks interspersed with rows of brick. So there are 4 rows of brick there in between rows of sandstone blocks. So quite an intricate construction, and probably more complicated than a plain brick arch. Very interesting structure, but we were stuck right up in the roof of it, and we've got no idea how deep it is. There were 2 more holes in the roof. Fortunately, the one we found hadn't been used for filling. This one is around halfway along the chamber, and there's another one beyond near the other end where all the material had been poured down. And it turns out this material that fills this space is all quarry waste. It's still clean, bright red, just the day when it was quarried out. And I'm going to stick my neck out and say that I'm absolutely convinced that this was waste material left over from the opening out of the Edge Hill Tunnel into a cutting in the first half of the 1880s. Because this chamber is only a few meters away from the edge of the cutting, it seems so obvious that this would have been used as a dumping ground because it was so convenient, and it's been filled to almost the roof. We couldn't measure the exact width of it, but we estimate it to be between 6 and 7 meters wide. We're too high up in the roof space to be able to tell for sure. So we spent a few days in there doing as much as we could by investigating, taking photographs and measuring before we had to fill it all in and cover it up again. And it's lost to us for the time being, excuse me, but we will be back as soon as this piece of land becomes free again. It's being used as a temporary car park at the moment, but we will be asking the council if we can have access and permission to excavate it out. I've just about done that in time, I think. So that's pretty much it. We were doing this in September last year, and we've been doing little bits and bobs of finishing off in the new tunnel on the other side of us, under the magnet joinery factory, and empty that down as far as we can go. And of course, at the moment, we're at a complete standstill, but hoping to be back soon and digging again. So I hope you've enjoyed the talk. We've had quite a number of subgroup members visit us in the past before on a number of occasions, and I'd like to extend an invitation to any of you. Please do come back, either as an organized group or as individuals. We'll always be glad to welcome you and show you round.